In this lesson, we're going to take a good look at the XML HTTP request, which is the core functionality of AJAX. One of the first things to learn is how it's spelled and capitalized. Your first guess would be that XML and HTTP would all be in uppercase, but you'd be right on one and wrong on the other. XML is capitalized. In HTTP, only the H is capitalized, and in request, only the R is capitalized. The reason this matters is because JavaScript is case sensitive, and if you get any of those characters wrong, JavaScript will get very confused. So after you've typed it a few times, you'll get used to which characters are and are not uppercase. Now, the XML HTTP request itself. It's JavaScript, so it's an object. Objects, as we know, contain properties. Here's the ones that XML HTTP request has. And we'll be covering these in much more detail over the next few lessons. Properties are ready state, response text, response XML, status, and status text. There's also an event handler called onReadyStateChange. The ready state property has several different statuses. When it has a value of 0, that's when you start off. It starts off uninitialized, object contains no data, there's nothing there. When it's a 1, that means that your request is loading. Things are going on, it's in progress. When it has a value of 2, your request has finished loading. When it has a value of 3, the official name for it is interactive, which means that the user can interact with the XML HTTP request object, although it isn't fully loaded, so I wouldn't really recommend it. And lastly, the value 4, which is complete. This is the one that you're going to be checking for almost every time, because in general, you're not going to want to take a look at the request until it's done initializing. Next off, there's status. As with any HTTP request, you're going to have a status. Generally, what you're going to want is a value of 200, which just means okay, everything worked great. Other possible statuses are 400 for bad request, 401 for unauthorized, 403 for forbidden, and the good old 404 not found, which I'm sure you've seen while browsing the web. And finally, 500 internal server error. For the most part, the values that you're going to care about are either 200, which is okay, or not 200, which means that you have a problem. As with any good JavaScript object, XML HTTP request has methods. And again, we'll be looking at these in much more depth over the next few lessons. There's abort, which says abort the request. Get all response headers, which asks the server for the response headers. Get response header, in which you pass a certain particular header name and get a response. The open method, which can be passed several different parameters. There's method, URL, an async flag, which is true or false, and the optional username and password. The most common example that we'll be seeing a lot of is an open, passing it a get, then passing it a URL, which is going to be something like myfile.xml, and then passing it a value of true. The async flag can be true or false. Asynchronous is true, which means that everything is going on without your code having direct control over it. If we set async to be false, then the request is what's called synchronous, which means your code is going to sit and wait for anything to come back from the server. The real value of XML HTTP request is in the way it is asynchronous. So you're almost always going to want to do an asynchronous request because you want things to be going on in the background without your code having to sit and wait for things to happen. Another method is send and some content. This actually sends the request to the server. And finally, set request header, which passes a label and a value to the server, which sets a specific header on the request that we're sending to the server. Next, we're going to get to see XML HTTP request in action and actually look at some code.